Okay, so last week, for those, I guess, really, Bob and Rick, I think you might have heard the recording. We went through the beginning part of this, the Malbim's intro, where he lays out, these are the 14, at the end of the 14 questions that he lays out, a lot of very detailed questions about, specifically around the Magid section of the Haggadah. So, um, what he's really doing there was asking questions like a lot of the questions that we probably ask ourselves too. Why is the order the way it's in? Why specifically these sources were brought in? He gets into much more detail, but that's really sort of the two categories of what he's asking. And so at the end, he says, Ela hine arba esrei she'elus v'ha'aros. These are my 14 questions and sort of insights. So it's both about the order in which they are, and it's also about specifically why this mimer was chosen versus something else. He said, one question is, why do we call it the Haggadah? So, and then and again, we'll have to, this is lengthy, so we won't go through every paragraph. But he talks about the fact that there's really sort of two different things that are going on within the Haggadah, that there's an overall flow to it, and then there's a very specific nuances to the sources themselves that are brought in. So let's start up inside right here. So it says, Hine, Chovas mitzvahs aseh, the Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim, he me'akasu v'yigad levincha. And this is really where he's where he's going with this is, you want to know the answer, why is everything the way it is? It's because the source, how do we know we have a mitzvah of Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim on Leil Seder? It's because of this pasuk. You have to tell your son, you have to tell your children, right? So that is a tzivoy, that's how we learn it for. Shehu tzivoy ha'chalati lahagir l'saper lahabonim gam kishe'inim sho'olim. That this is the tzivoy, that the definitive tzivoy, right? That we have to talk about and retell the story, even when the children aren't asking questions. The he says it's an entire pasuk. It's not just a Yigad Levincha. As he's going to lay out for us, it's an entire pasuk, and he uses that pasuk as a template for how to build out the Magid section. So,
Yep.
Sorry, is there a
Yep.
question?
Yeah, very quickly. Are there two mitzvot, one to tell the children and one to discuss it ourselves? I think so, no?
So it seems like it's really just one. And just incumbent in that is that we're telling we're telling it to really anybody who's there, but certainly part of it is the chinuch of our children. But it seems to be
definitely part of it. The question is whether there's a separate mitzvah. I mean, for instance, as like in the third paragraph of the Shema, and the story about the old rabbis and Bnei Brak doesn't seem to have to do with Haggadah.
right. So that I think we'll get there.
Okay.
Yeah, I think we'll get there.
Okay. Sorry.
So this
Okay.
is the Holech Bakvosov, and this is like we have to go through this step by step, meaning step by step of the pasuk itself. It all fits in with the actual pasuk itself. There are 6 different parts. If you want to divide up the pasuk, you can divide it into 6 parts. The Malbim says the first is v'higad levincha. You have to tell over. Bayom Hahu, when do we do it? Bayom Hahu, that day. Lemor, there is a sipur part of it. I'm sort of, already filling in with what the Malbim is going to get to, but there's the sipur part. That's Lemor. Bavur Zeb, what is this Bavur Zeb telling me? We're going to see that in a moment. Asali, Hashem betzesim mitzrayim. That Hashem did for me. That's the 5th part, and the 6th is betzesim mitzrayim. So we can see there's this whole. It's not just a couple of words, but this entire pasuk is sort of like standing there and saying, "Hey, there's what to be darshaned out from this pasuk." So lefi ha'anacha haktsara hazos kvar bole ta'am haseder she'en lishnos es ha'inyanim makom lamakom. This is very clearly telling us the fact that the pasuk is worded the way it is, it's sort of screaming out to us that there's something to this order, and you can't change it. This is how it's supposed to be. Shelo lahakdim as a me'uchar because of la'acher as a mukdam min hazizim mimkomam. You can't change around the order, and you can't move them. V'yada na'avar al kol chelkei haseder hazeh v'nifkesham echad echad. Okay, so he's going to look at each one of these pieces, individually, and so let's just jump into these. So it says "V'gada de levincha," right? That's the first part of it. So Shmona psakos harishonos min ha'avadim hayinu ad v'she'enu yodei lishol. Right. So I probably should have mentioned, and I meant to send an email and I forgot to, that it'd probably be helpful if you have a Haggadah near you, maybe grab one real quick. If not, we'll talk it through. But if you happen to have a Haggadah, it might be helpful. So he says in the eight. The first 8 lines of the Haggadah from Avadim Hayinu ad, so it goes Avadim Hayinu, and then it goes through the Arba Banim, right? The four sons. So Va'ad Bechlal, Sovavos al Tzir V'higad Levincha. He says that whole thing, Avadim Hayinu, all the way through the 4 sons, is all talking about, or is all centered on this phrase of you have to tell the children. Kol shmona ma'amarim sofa achas v'dvarim achadim me'inyan le'inyan b'socha inyan shel haggadah shel habanim. This is all one thing. It's not avadim hayinu and then the 4 sons as 2 separate things. It's not. It's all one thing that is all centered on the idea of telling the story to the children. He says, it's if you don't really dive into what's going on, like what the Malbim is doing, he says you would read Avadim Hayinu and you would say, this is the story, right? This is Sipur Yitzias Mitzrayim, Avadim Hayinu Lefarba Mitzrayim, right? We were slaves. In Echad Mehem Asher Hitel Safek Bezeh Ki'ilu Davar Borer. It seems very obvious to everybody that this is the Sipur. This is the story. Na'alem al kol safek shehu sipuri v'monahu la'agi lifnei avadim hayinu b'lashon hamon. He says, not only that, he says, I'll prove it to you. What does everybody say in there as they're doing the Haggadah when we get to avadim hayinu? He says, the terutz hukach, right? We just said the manishtana, the 4 questions, and everybody says, what's the answer to the 4 questions? Avadim hayinu. Malbim says, you couldn't be further from the truth. That is not what Avadim Hayinu is all about. Okay, I'm going to, again, he goes into a lot of beautiful language and detail, and it's worth looking at, but for our purposes, we're going to just skip a little bit. It says, no, we're still in the same part of V'higad Levincha. He says, okay, so if it's not about Sipur, then what is it? Okay, ha'emes karas umachrezes ki kishim she'ena nachrim motziim b'cho ha'tesha psakos ad matzilas ovdi avodah kol zecher v'chol roshem misipur. None of this has anything to do with the Sipur until we get to mitchila ovdi avodah zarah. The Tseomad. That's when we get to Sipur, and we'll get there. Hopefully we'll get there. But if we're not there yet. So kin gam hamilos ha'achados v'aschol avadim hayinu lefarba Mitzrayim v'tziyenu Hashem Elokeinu misham biyad chazaka uvizra netuya einam sipur klal. That's not the story. Rak hu hemshech halimud v'hauchacha shebesof lahotzi halimud shechovas hasipur hu afilu al chacham v'navon v'yodei eskol haTorah. This is simply an introduction to saying, why are we here? What are we doing? What is the chiyuv on all of us? The chiyuv is avadim hayinu. There is a mitzvah of V'higad Levincha. All of these verses, all of these lines are coming to tell us to expound on this chiyuv that we have. V'tam osho davar ki zehu sayeg lezdikron levanenu uvenei banenu ad sof kol hadoros. And it's not just us; it's all the generations. Yan ki gam tzitzav Tzitzainu v'tzitzainu ad dor achron al afar yakum kulam hem bechlal atzala v'hayitzia me'eretz Mitzrayim. It's incumbent upon all of us. V'gam alim lahodus l'Shem Hashem al kain laman yihi azikron azel l'mishmeres l'doros olam ukva chov al kol ish v'ish. This is telling us who it is and what's, who's included in this chiyuv. V'ish, kol ish v'ish lasaper midi shana b'shana. We do this every year on an annual basis. Afilu imhu chacham v'navon, and that's why at the end of Avadim Hayinu, what do we say? It doesn't matter if you are a chacham, a navon, v'yodea kol haTorah kula. You can't forget to do this. This is not something that you are exempt from, no matter what a Talmid Chacham you are. So if you've ever wondered in the middle of Avadim Hayinu, why are we talking about how smart you are, or what, like that's always a question. Like, what are we talking about this? We never talking about this with any other mitzvah. That doesn't, maybe you could have a tour if you were a Talmid Chacham, you don't have to do this. We don't have that. What is this coming from? The Malbim explains this is just telling us what the chiyuv is. We're sort of going through the Shulchan Aruch of Yigar Levincha. That's all we're doing right now because that's this first part of the pasuk. Okay, so Elu hayu pturim eza ishim lesaper haisa efsharus ametzir sheishchach hadavar. He says, why is it that everybody has to go through it? To your point, Bob, like you've got 5 Talmidei Chachamim who are hanging on Bnei Brak. It doesn't sound like there's anybody else there with them. Maybe there were, maybe they weren't. But if, let's say, there weren't, why are they going through this? And so the Malbim is just talking about why it's important, even if you don't have the children around. You can't risk the idea of losing any of this, losing our Masorah over time, over generations. So that's what he says. So that is what we're doing at this point. It's all about the chiyuv. Okay, I'm going to keep skipping because this is a lot of arichos as he keeps going to the same idea. The sof davar kol hamaymer avadim hayinu enu sipuri klal v'klal. Right. So sof kol sof. This is not the sipur. We're not there yet. We'll get to the sipur, but we're not there yet. Rak hu maymer limudei alochich betam l'svora ki afilu kulanu chachamim mechuyavim l'saper. All of us have a chiyuv. Because mizbonim ba'ayin yafa yera v'yodea ki zehu apshat ta'amiti shel ha'piska hazos lefi zeh maymer soviv holich be'inyan v'yigarat levincha. That's, it's all surrounding the idea of v'yigarat levincha v'chol ha'maymarim aboim achrav him gam ke me'inyan le'inyan behemshech zeh maybe ma'isa b'Rabbi Eliezer ma'isa shahaya b'polki chavrusach kadisha sa Rashi Chachmei Yisrael Hatanoim Rabbi Eliezer Rabbi Yoshua, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Tarfon, right? All this. Afki kol raz lo haya anyis lahem. There's not a secret in the Torah that was missing from them, that was hiding from them. Vedu eskol Torah kula b'chol zos hayim misaprim mitzias Mitzrayim kol oso halayla. Okay. So again, it's just about the chiyuv. Okay. So that is the first part. What is the second part? V'yigarat levincha bayom. So what happens after Achari Shish the Mizayar Agada Shah Mizasev Binin Vigada Levincha Vahuchiach Kovas Sipor? So now we understand the chiyuv. Bo Ata Lemidrash Kaseder Akasav Tevas Bayom Hahu. So now we're up to the piece of the pasuk Bayom Hahu. What do we get up to in the Haggadah? Yochel Merosh Chodesh, the piece from the Mechilta. Right, the Mechilta talks about when do we have to do Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim, and what is its source? We say Yachom Rosh Chodesh. You might have thought from Rosh Chodesh Nisan, Talmud Lomar, Bayom Hahu. No, how do we know it? Bayom Hahu. It's darshing it out from our pasuk. That's why the Balagada is putting it in right here because we're up to Bayom Hahu. The Gomer Adrash Lochech Zmana Sipur B'Shor Sheish Matzah Umarer Munachim Lefonecha. So it's just sort of putting it all together that this is when we have to do it, when we have Matzah Marer before us. That's why that paragraph is brought in now. It's because Bayom Hahu. Okay. It's amazing that if you start to look at this, like, wow, it really does fit in with this template that the Malbim is, it really does make a lot more sense when you look at this. So now we're up to Lamor. So Lamor is going to be the sipur, right? You see, Yesod ha-musar ki mesader ha-haggadah holech be'akvos ha-kozav v'shomer es tza'adav. He's really sort of going step by step. He's not skipping anything. Okay, nachrei she'avar v'yigarat levincha v'yavim mahu hinehu omed etzot tevis Lamor v'samach al milas Lamor seder ha-amira v'ha-sipur. Now we're up to the sipur ad kan ha-halachos, right? We finished with the Shulchan Aruch. We closed that book. In the chiyuv of the sipur, zman sipur, shedrash me'tevos hamukdamos bekasav begam halachos ha'hina royos mitzad atzman lahagdimim lifnei etzem hasipur ve'atahu shemaschos hasipur atzman mitchila ovdei avodah zarah. So now when we get to mitchila ovdei avodah zarah, now we're actually up to the sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim. That's where it starts. Uparsha Arami Ovid Avi Vayir Mitzrayim Avagomer Shekol Mila Kolelis Harbe Mehasipur. Because the way that we darshan out from Parshas Bikurim, we really spend a lot of time in the Seder darshaning out all the entire Sipur within those psukim of, from Parshas Bikurim of, Arami Ovid Avi, right? Shekol Mila Kolelis Harbe Mehasipur. Everything is darshan out. It includes a lot of different ideas. Kol Inuyim v'kol ha'osos v'amosim, everything that we suffered, all the different wonders. V'dorish kol hadrashos v'tluyos b'chol mila u'mila sheparsha zu maimer kama ma'alos v'al achas kama v'kama. Now you could ask a question. He's again, if you look at your Agada, right in the middle of that piece, we have the Dayenu comes up, and so you say, well, wait a second here. What's the Dayenu doing? We're in the middle of Sipur Yesias Mitzrayim. Why are we singing Dayenu, right? So that he says, really, it shouldn't be here. And it's possible he doesn't say this, but I've heard from other sources, right, that they say that Dayenu was probably added later. I mean, the Haggadah certainly was, we've talked about this last week too, that the Halach Ma'anya came later, right? We know that certain pieces of our Haggadah, some of it is earlier, some of it comes later. So there's those who say that the Dayenu came later. So maybe that this is what the Malbim is trying to tell us, is that, it doesn't really fit here. They added it in at some point, and they added it in for a reason, though. He says, really, when I say lefichach, we get into Hallel, that's when we should say Dayenu, because Dayenu is all about Hakara Satov, right? We're breaking it into pieces. Every single thing that we should be Makir Tov about, that fits in with Lefichach. But why is it here? Yishnei Amarim Hahem Malhivim Halev Esauda B'chol Mini Kalus of Nimshach Achreim Hemshach Lefichach. Right, that's okay. Sorry, he's still saying that. That's why it should be a Lefichach. Yan Kikol Kukol Kach Harbi Lahetiv Imanu Lefichach Nanu Chayvim L'Rosh La'Losh V'Ka'azo V'Ka'chashiv Kol Mini Kalus. This doesn't, and he says it doesn't appear in the Mishnah, like this doesn't appear in the Mishnayos, in our Pesachim, which is the source for a lot of what we're seeing in the Haggadah. It doesn't appear. So why is it here? The Dayenu mipnei b'maimer kama malos ba'u ha'osafos al hasipur hakodem. It really, so he says it really sort of adds in to what we're already talking about with the Sipur. Shechashu Sipuru Yeser Hatovos V'chasodim she'asa imano Kadosh Baruch Hu ad ba'onu el hamanucha ve'el hanachala. He says, because when we just talk about the Sipur and we're darshaning it out from Arami Ovid Avi, we don't go through every single thing that our Kadosh Baruch Hu did for us all the way through the Midbar until we went into Eretz Yisrael. It's only in Dayenu that we really break that into pieces. So yes, it's all about Hodah, but it also does add into the Sipur also, because it's adding in all these different points that don't get discussed with the psukim that are brought. So that's why he says, that's why it's still shayach mehem sipurim hashayachim l'Yetzias Mitzrayim. So that's why he says that, really probably should have gone with Hallel, but here's a reason why we could still include it with the Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim, because it's still adding in as well. So that's what the Malbim is doing, trying to figure. I mean, it's clearly he's struggling a little bit too, trying to figure out why it was put in here, but he's saying that could be a reason why that is. Okay, so that is the Sipur. I know we only have a few minutes left. I have a few minutes after 1. I don't know if anybody else can stay, but I'm happy to go through a little bit further as well if anybody has time. So the Mechalka Hariyavis, the Baburza. So then we get to Acharei Hanacha Hayesodius Ki Bala Gada Seder as Seder as a Haggadah Lefi Seder Hakasuv. And now that we understand it, it's all about this this pasuk Al Kain. Acharei Avru Al Milas Lemor Hinehu Ba Letevas Bavor says. So now we're up to Bavor Zem and Umevi Divrei Rabban Gamliel Kol Shelo Amar Shlosha Devarim Elu BePesach Lo Yatzei Yedecho Vasa. Right. This is a Mishnah in Arba Pesachim, where Rabban Gamliel says you have to say these 3 things. If not, you are not Yotzei, you're Chiyuv. The Rabban Gamliel Darish Lehachi mean Mavor Zeh. So the Malbim is implicitly asking a question. What is this question? Well, if you look at the Mishnah just says Rabban Gamliel says Kol Shelo Amar Shlosha Devarim. Well, how does he know this? How does he know that we're not Yotzei Ar Chiyuv? We haven't discussed which Chiyuv we're talking about here, but how does he know? Forget that for a moment. How does he know this? How does he know that if I don't say Pesach Matzah Mar and expound upon those, I haven't done what I'm supposed to be doing? So the Malbim says, I tell you how he knows. Ba'avor zeh. It says very clearly in V'higara b'levincha Vayomahu Leimor Ba'avor zeh, because of this. What's the this that we're saying that this means something that I can point to? That's the matzah umar and the korban Pesach. Sorry, let's see. Okay, Rabban Gamliel Darish Le Hachi mean Ba'avor zeh. The ihu meforesh is a cause of V'higara levincha Vayomahu Leimor Ba'avor zeh shekavanaso shemechuyev lahagid libno b'leil Pesach Ba'avor ma. Who is Zelafanino Pesach Matzah Umar? Because the chiyuv is to have, as you're saying, the Sipur Yitzias Mitzrayim, it has to be the chiyuv includes the fact that sitting in front of you is Pesach Matzah Umar. Al kol echad me'ela mechuyuv lahagid zehu tamu shel zeh zehu tamu shel zeh. You have to describe the reasons for these three items specifically. Pesach al shum shel Pasach, Matzah al shum shelo hispik b'tzeikam shel avoseru lahachmitz, umor al shum shel moraru. Right? Which chiyuv are we not, according to Rabban Gamliel, if we don't do this, what chiyuv have we not done either lecharchila, maybe even a few b'diavad, not sure, but it's v'gad levincha, which makes sense because according to the Malbim, this is all going on that pasuk. It's all about Sipur Yitzias Mitzrayim. So to the Malbim, Sipur Yitzias Mitzrayim, Rabban Gamliel is telling us that the only way to do it, at least the proper way to do it, is to expound on Pesach Matzah Umar as part of this whole thing. And now we're up to Ba'avor zeh, so that's why this Mishnah is brought in at this time. Kilafi Perushu Zehu Bechlal Hagada Zeh Hamunach Lefana Ba'avor Mahu Ubechlal Atzivor Shov V'Gad Levincha Sheyomar Ba'avor zeh Klomar Ta'amur Shel Zeh V'Shel Zeh. Okay. Lukach Medayik Tevas Zeh Bezech. Pesach zeh matzah zeh mar zeh shehu koloshin akazu ba'avur zeh dekoya kulhu. Okay, let's keep going. So that is ba'avur zeh. That's why Rabban Gamliel is in that spot. Now we got it to asa Hashem li. Hashem did for me. Achrei sima drasha ba'avur zeh ba'ata lefi siduru shal kazu lemidrash tevas. Asa Hashem li lekach zehu makomo shel hamaimer bechol dor v'dor chayiv adam liros is atzma. So that's why the next piece that we get into is the continue. It is a continuation of the same Mishnah, but it's saying that we all have to see ourselves as if we ourselves came out of Mitzrayim. Why is that? Because it says Asa Hashem li. He did it for me. Hashem did it for me. So I'm included in that. We have to envision that we ourselves went out. Who This is the place that it has to be. It's been pinned down to this spot. It has to be here. If you go back to his question and in question 12, he says, you know what, if you think about it, the words here are very similar to Avadim Hayinu. He says now that question just falls away because those are two different things. Avadim Hayinu is about the chiyuv. This is all about Asa Hashem Li, but Asa Hashem Li, just those three words. Okay, so that's why that's here. Just gonna go down to the sixth one, B'tzei Simim Mitzrayim, and we're almost done now. So B'tzei Simim Mitzrayim, the last two words in the pasuk. So Ma'amer Lefichach Hu Mavo Lepsicha Lamirs Halal. Right. So after we get to or after we got through all these pieces, now we finally get up to Lefichach, and we're starting to get into the first pitlach of Halo, even though we're not at Halo yet, but we sort of start Halo within Magid, right? We continue Halo after Shulchan Aruch. We're not going to discuss that right now, but that's where we are. So, so he says this is the beginning of the Amiras Halo HaMitzri B'tzeis Yisrael Mitzrayim. He calls it Halo HaMitzri because the first two kapitlach in Hallel were written by Moshe, by Bnei Yisrael, whatever it was, but they're certainly all about leaving Yetzias Mitzrayim. So he calls it Halo HaMitzri. Ki alkein al kol hachasare ba'emes ha'ela anachnu mechuyavim lahodos halal v'chulei. So this is why are we starting it here, the Halo here? Because we are mechuyuv to to thank Hashem, to sing Hallel, b'chomini hilo v'shevach sheba'olam masayim v'nermar lefonav haluka, perush nermar lefonav hahalo hamaschel haluka v'seder bal hagada amiris halo hamitzri b'tzeis Yisrael mitzrayim han ba'achrona gam ken lefi seder hakazav shagata lebincha ki achrei shagamar adrash al milos asa Hashem Li hinehu omed etza milos b'tzeis mimitzrayim, when we went out of Egypt. V'samach al zeh b'derech remez v'yigared levincha b'tzeis mimitzrayim, that you have to tell your children when you leave or in going out of Mitzrayim, sheyagi v'yomer halo hamitzri b'tzeis Yisrael mimitzrayim, that the halo has to start out when you're talking about the seaport. It's connecting the two together, that the idea of b'tzeis mimitzrayim is connected to Vigad Levincha, and therefore you have to start Hallel, even though we're not even at Hallel yet, because the pasuk is making it incumbent upon us to do so because of those last two words in the pasuk. Why don't we? I know we're over time. This is the end of. This is really the end. He's going to just sort of wrap things up at this point. One thing he does say in this next few paragraphs is he talks about who was this Baal Haggadah. He says, by the way, he says, why do we call it the Haggadah? Now he says very clearly, why do we call this Haggadah, not Sipur or something like that? Because it's the Higgadah de Levincha. This is all based on Higgadah de Levincha. It makes sense that we call this the Haggadah. But then he says, who was this? The secretive Baal HaHaggadah, the person who put it all together? He said it was clearly during the times of the Tanaim, because of all the Tanaic, sources that are brought in. But he says it must have been Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi. So that's the Malbim's approach, is that it's Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi who put this together, at least the initial pieces, and then clearly, items were added on later. But that's, hopefully that gives you a template to sort of at least understand a little bit better, like what is the hemshech, right? What is the connection, the flow, and why were these specific pieces, these specific sources brought in that put, that really sort of fill in the Magid section of our Haggadah.